Good evening, fans, and welcome to this week's SICW All-Star Wrestling. This week, we're going to take a trip back in time and remember a great wrestling legend and a friend of us all here at SICW. Tonight, we take a look back at a tribute to Larry Matysik. Just days after the anniversary of the passing of Larry Matysik, we think it's only appropriate to bring you this great tribute to him tonight. Sit back, take a minute, and let's head back to the days together of our great friend Larry Matysik.
Thank you, and I'm sorry. I know that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put together, but bear with me a little bit here. Thank you, because I couldn't be more happy and more proud to receive the Jim Melby Award from the Tragos Thez Hall of Fame, and to have those names involved, Thez, Tragos, and Jim Melby, who's a great friend. What an honor, what a chance to be involved in a Hall of Fame that really means something. It's not a merchandising deal, it's not a marketing deal, it's a serious Hall of Fame. And I'm so honored and so pleased to be there. I'm sorry, obviously, because I'm not here to enjoy the moment with you. And I know you had a wrestling story event this afternoon. Boy, would I have loved to heard that with Jim Ross and Jerry Briscoe and Baron Von Raschke. I could have told the first stories about those guys, too. But we'll think about that. The problem is, long story short, spinal stenosis, rotary scoliosis, various nerve damages. I can't really move around, a lot of pain, mobility shot. What do you do for it? Well, you can have surgery, or I can do what Ric Flair said a couple months ago. Ric Flair called me and said, "Hey, I heard about your back, brother. What's wrong with you?" So I went to my whining and groaning and complaining, and he listened to it all, and he says, "Well, don't get messed up on those pain pills." He says, "You've been around wrestling a long time. You know, if you get messed up on those pain pills, kind of trouble you get in." He says, "Do what I do." And I said, "Well, what do you do, Rick?" He says, "I drink. I drink a lot." He says, "and I'm 65 years old and I can still take a bump." Well, I don't know. We'll have to think about that, but I did appreciate his input. And I guess I've seen enough bumps over the years, considering when I started doing writing about wrestling, I was 12 years old, about the same age Jim Melby was probably when he started. The first thing I wrote for was a Ring magazine in New York City. I sent them an article about Whipper Billy Watson versus Gene Kiniski in a Texas death match at Kiel Auditorium in St. Louis. Lo and behold, they printed the doggone thing. Didn't pay me. This is wrestling. Didn't get paid, but they didn't ask my age either, so they were just happy with whatever it was that I had written. From there, I started writing for different magazines and doing some features, and somehow it opened the door to that legendary St. Louis promoter, Sam Muchnick. Sam himself had been a writer with the old Star Times in St. Louis, and the Times really before they became the Star Times, traveled with the Gas House Gang. So I think he had a soft spot in his heart for somebody who liked to write. Somehow I put it all together, and through high school and into college, I was a gopher over at the St. Louis Wrestling Club, which was fine. By the time I got out of college, here was this job awaiting me with the St. Louis Wrestling Club. And then I had two passions. One was the writing, and one was, amazingly enough, this fascinating business, this crazy business called professional wrestling. So I started working for Sam Muchnick, and I probably did about all you can do in an office. I wrote the publicity, I wrote the advertising, I wrote the 4-page program that some of you may remember, the wrestling news, that Sam wanted to sound just like the Sunday sports page in a major metropolitan newspaper, and we made every effort to do that. I made every effort to do that. So I did that. I wrote bios on the wrestlers for the announcers on Wrestling at the Chase. I wrote backgrounds about the angles that were going on in St. Louis for the announcers on Wrestling at the Chase. And when the opening came and they wanted to make a change of announcers on Wrestling at the Chase, they said, well, let's give it to that 24-year-old kid Matysik. He writes a pretty good story. Let's see if he knows anything. Let's see if he can talk. Well, I also was lucky enough to have the gift of gab, and I had Sam in my corner. So I started doing Wrestling at the Chase when I was 24 years old in 1972. Couldn't believe it, man. Couldn't believe it. And I was still writing wrestling journalism. I was writing for magazines under assumed names because then I was Sam Muchnick's guy, so naturally if I was writing certain stories, it would be obvious that I was favoring certain people, so I did that under an assumed name. I wrote the NWA bulletin for Sam when he was the NWA president, the National Wrestling Alliance president. I just kept writing, and I kept doing different things in the office. I got involved once again as the play-by-play announcer, deeply into the production of the show, and that of course led into the booking, which is a fascinating part of wrestling, as you all know. It also opens up the door to the politics and the personalities. Well, I started doing all that, and it covered the whole spectrum, all because I could write and do wrestling journalism with Sam Muchnick. 1983, it all fell apart. Got involved in a little war here in St. Louis. That led, of course, to another major war, as we know, all over the country when Vince McMahon came in. I survived that thing, spent a decade working for Vince McMahon, got so mad, so angry at professional wrestling, didn't want anything to do with it. That's it, I'm done, I hate it. But that goofy old Herb Simmons, and you guys have either met him or you're going to meet him over this weekend, he kept coming to me because we'd worked on some independent wrestling shows together with Bruiser Brody and myself and Herb. Herb kept coming in and saying, well, I got this card, can you help me out? You got any ideas on this? So I did helping out Herb, and you couldn't get away from it. And then Dave Meltzer. I know some people don't like him, but if you want to talk about a wrestling journalist, Dave Meltzer is a wrestling journalist. And he'd call me up about every other week, and he'd say, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? You remember so-and-so. What's the story on this? And I couldn't stay away from it, and I didn't want to stay away from professional wrestling. Herb's fault, Meltzer's fault, my fault. My wife's fault. She says it's a disease. You can't get away from it. All you in that audience, you know what I'm talking about. The nostalgia craze started in about 2000. Here again, here's Herb. He says, well, you taped a lot of stuff off Wrestling at the Chase. We can put together some tapes. Maybe a few people want to see it. I said, nobody wants to see that stuff. So we did a few tapes. Next thing we know, we can't make enough of them. We made the tapes. That led to Herb saying, and also another good friend, my lawyer, Mel Hudnick, you got to write a book. You got to write a book. You got all these stories about all these fascinating personalities. So I was lucky enough that I met a gentleman by the name of Michael Holmes, who became my editor for ECW Press in Toronto, Canada. Wrote Wrestling at the Chase, took off like wildfire. Couldn't believe it. Could not believe it. That led to the Brody book that I did along with Barbara Goodish, of course, who was Frank's widow, I guess we'll say, isn't it the polite way to say it? And certainly made it a different kind of book. And that led to doing Drawing Heat the hard way. And that led to doing the St. Louis Wrestling Record Book, which is an e-book strictly through the internet. And that led to finally doing, last year, the 50 Greatest Professional Wrestlers of All Times. I hadn't irritated enough people in the earlier books, so I thought I'd take another shot at them with the 50 Greatest Professional Wrestlers of All Times. Wrote all those books, want to write some more. Depends what happens with my back, depends how much pain I can stand sitting and taking it. But I love it, and Michael Holmes, too, became another great friend, somebody who has a passion for this business. And that's what we all have. Herb, Meltzer, me, Mel Hudnick, you name it, everybody out in that audience, you have a passion for pro wrestling, and that's why you're part of this great thing at this incredible facility, the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. Thez, Tragos, Jim Melby, what wonderful names. You know, toward the end of Gene Kiniski's life, I'd gotten in the habit of calling Gene on a pretty regular basis. Great guy, you all know that. A lot of wrestling stories there with Gene Kiniski. And I said to Gene towards the end, when Gene's mind was still strong, everything else kind of breaking down around the old lion, I said, Gene, do you have any regrets? Is there anything you regret about the wrestling business? He kind of hesitated, and Gene Kiniski said, I've got one regret. The regret is I can't go back and do it again. But believe you me, that's my regret. I bet it's your regret. But now we have a Hall of Fame here, Thez, Tragos. I'm so honored to be part of it. I certainly congratulate all the other winners today. And keep in mind, if you have a regret and it's The only regret you have is I'd like to go back and do it again. That's a pretty good regret. I thank everyone here. What a wonderful honor. I couldn't be more thrilled and I couldn't be more happy. Thank you all so very much.
Then you was a good first.
a very difficult time, I think, for all of us. Talking about Larry, who was taken from us way too soon. The one thing I can say about Larry was one of the most influential people in my life. I probably learned more from him, certainly about pro wrestling, than anyone that I ever met. Any of you guys who know him well know that he was just so smart about so many different aspects of wrestling. I think that like the thing that I was just so fortunate to meet him and be friends with him, because I think that like when I was in my 20s, I got decades worth of experience and knowledge of wrestling from talking to him on the phone for long periods of time about just every aspect, cutting through the garbage. I would always like tell him things that were going on, and then he would explain to me what they really were. People would tell me something, and he would explain, well, this is what they tell you, and watch it play out, and this is what it really is. And it was a great learning experience. And Larry was very, very talented. He was a talented writer. He was a talented television announcer. He was a talented booker. He great promoter. He was a great ambassador to pro wrestling. You guys in St. Louis, as I'm sure most of you know, the reputation of pro wrestling in St. Louis was so different from everywhere else in the country. And it was, Sam Mushnick was the guy who was behind that, created a very different version of pro wrestling than anywhere else. And Larry learned from Sam and tried to keep that going, and he did as long as he could. Forces changed the industry, and for the better, for the worse, it's what happened. And I think Larry, without a doubt, Larry was extremely underutilized the last couple of decades. I saw so many people, I met so many people in this business that got into power and were movers and shakers, and I would talk to them, and I would always think, they don't know anything about this business compared to Larry, and Larry was not used as well as he could have been, obviously, in pro wrestling after everything changed in 1984. But pro wrestling is very, very lucky to have him. I was so lucky to make his acquaintance and then become a good friend of his for so long. He changed my life in so many ways. I don't think for a second that I could have been as successful, and the Observer could have been as big and as successful through all the trials and tribulations without what he taught me and without his advice for all those years, and just teaching me how to read the scene and the instincts and things like that anyone who was around him kind of could learn from being around him. There's always lessons to be learned, because he had just so much experience in this business. And for all of you guys that knew him, and his family, Pat and Kelly, I want to send my sympathies to you guys, and know that it was really hard, I know, for him for the last several years with his body deteriorating and his health going in recent years. Yet every time I talked with him, it was great. He was, his mind never left, I guess. But it was just too soon, and I was so broken up by what happened. It was really hard for me for a couple of days. It still is, and I'm sure it will be for a while, for a long time. I always have a lifetime of memories, a lifetime of stories, and several lifetimes worth of lessons from knowing him. And I started reading his writing when I was probably like 11 years old, and when he used to do the programs for Sam Mushnick in St. Louis, what they would mail out ahead of time, and I got on the mailing list when I was 12 years old, and when those St. Louis programs came in the mail, it was like your imagination ran wild. He would describe these matches with Jack Briscoe and Dory Funk Jr. and Harley Race and Johnny Valentine and Terry Funk and the Bruiser and all of these names, and he would talk about how exciting they were, and it just made you feel like Heel Auditorium on Friday night was the place to be. Living in San Jose, that was I was never going to get there, and by the time I was old enough to get there, obviously things had changed. So I actually never saw one of those shows live. I'm sure if I was born earlier, I would have figured out a way to come many times. But that's how life changes. When you're a kid, you kind of go like, when I get older, I'm going to be going to St. Louis several times a year, when, for vacations and see these big shows. And by the time I was old enough, not that there was no wrestling in St. Louis, but it was different, and it was not special, like it was during that era. And you guys who grew up in that era were really, really lucky. I mean, wrestling, there was unique wrestling all over the world, but St. Louis was special and unique, and just a different animal than anywhere else, and just carefully put together with respect, and really catering to the fans, and really not being arrogant with the presentation, not treating the fans like they were dirt, which most of the promoters did. Treat them like they were garbage. I mean, it was like they weren't marks; they were customers. It was just a completely different thing, and we created a lot of really wonderful memories. I got those programs all through the '70s into the '80s, and then I met Larry in Houston, Texas, when he was running opposition for that brief period of time, and we started talking, and we talked all the time. And in the '80s, I think that there was that period where me and Larry and I think Bruiser Brody, we all had our 3 different roles, kind of like I think we were probably the most informed people in the business at the time, because Larry was working for Vince McMahon, so he knew that side, and Brody was an independent star going from place to place, so he had his hands in everywhere, and I was talking to people everywhere constantly, all the time, all the different promoters and wrestlers and fans and things like that, and we kind of could pool our knowledge and really get a great, it was great for me. I think I benefited maybe the most of the 3, and Larry and I lived through that the death of Brody, which was a horrible thing. We lived through many transitions in the wrestling business, many different changes. Then Larry became an author, writing many books, and I was so glad that he did, so a lot of people could read. Like Drawing Heat the Hard Way, I know that like in Ring of Honor, they quote stuff, the management of Ring of Honor, I know they quote stuff out of his book all the time. Larry gave the book to Gary Juster, and they all read it, and in that way, his lessons, because of the books, I think his lessons will live on. Hopefully I learned enough from him, and I can look from the stuff that I learned, keep that going, and hopefully his memory in wrestling will keep going. And for all of you guys who knew him, he's a really, really special guy. And I don't know what else to say, but I will always miss Larry. I will always be grateful for him being a friend. He was a loyal friend. We never fought. He had to teach me a lesson. He was very good at doing so without ever insulting me, but he always taught me. And I think that's what he did with everyone. And anyway, for all of you guys, I wish I could be there really bad. I really do. But I want you to know, I want everyone to know, like, I was so sad. Except for, I don't know, maybe my own father dying. This was one that was just so emotional and deep to me. And all you guys, we were all very, very lucky to know him, and very grateful for knowing him.
Hello everyone, this is Bill Apter, and I'm here to say a few words about my dear friend Larry Matysik. Larry had a passion for the wrestling business, more so than anyone I have ever met, period, the end. The years that he spent at the St. Louis Wrestling Club alongside Sam Muchnick were just incredible. And I really have to say that they were such a great, iconic team. They really were, because Sam gave the reins over in so many ways to Larry that it was Larry that kept up the day-to-day operations of that office. I never forgot when I worked for the magazines, Larry and I would talk once a week, where he'd give me all the information on who was coming to St. Louis, and he always had that. When he talked about the wrestlers, he always told me about how classic this match was going to be and how much he couldn't wait to see Dory Funk or Jack Briscoe or Harley Race. He just, again, you could feel that passion through the crackling of the phone wires. I'll miss Larry Matysik very much, and the wrestling business and his family and his friends have lost someone, but his legacy, when you look at what he did and the contributions he made to the wrestling business and his family life and to his fans, again, they are unequaled. Larry Matysik, we will miss you very, very, very much, and I valued you as a dear friend and one of the best people I had ever known to help me in so many ways in my career. Thank you, Larry. You will be sorely missed.
Hello, Herb Simmons coming to you once again, and as promised, I wanted to come back to you after you've been watching so many comments and testimonies from so many people that our late great friend Larry Matysik touched. So tonight I wanted to just kind of expound on that, on what Larry Matysik meant to each and every one of his fans. You might say me, his number one fan for 51 years, as I've said before. I had the pleasure and honor of calling him my friend, and I miss him every day. I'll never forget the day he left us. So what we've tried to do here, what you've been watching, is just pay a little tribute to what he meant to so many people. As you've seen, so many of the workers, so many of his friends, people like Bill Apter, nationally known, people like Dave Meltzer, nationally known, sent in their little video clips of what Larry Matysik meant to them. So many of the workers that Larry met when they was just starting out, people like Ron Powers, the Giant Assassin, all of the boys in the locker rooms. He meant so much to so many people, as you heard them say on this video. He's gone, but he's never going to be forgotten, and that's what we hope to do with this video. We're talking about a gentleman who followed his dream. He knew at a very, very young age what that dream was, and he wanted to know all he could about the business of professional wrestling. When he was 16 years old, he went into the office of Sam Muchnick, the late great president of the National Wrestling Alliance. Didn't even have a driver's license. His father had to drive him to the appointment. And as he told me many times, that was actually the start of his life. He was there meeting with this gentleman, larger than life, basically. He'd done so much research on Sam Muchnick, the history of what Sam Muchnick meant to the wrestling business. And early on, he told me that I wanted to follow in that man's footsteps. So at 16 years old, first paycheck he got from Sam. Imagine that, getting a paycheck, didn't have a driver's license. But he went on to learn so much from Sam. I had the honor and pleasure of going to lunch with Larry and Sam on numerous occasions over the years. They're going to dinner. And I remember one particular night we were sitting at the Fairmount Park racetrack, place that Sam enjoyed going periodically. He loved going to their little dinner lounge they had there, loved to eat a steak. We were sitting there around the table, and it was just Larry, Sam, and myself. And I remember Sam looking at me and said, "Hey, Herb," said, "I want to give you a little advice like I gave this young man here." And he nodded to Larry, and He said, in this business, he said, if you keep these open and this closed, you'll learn a lot of what's going on. And I remember Larry telling me that. The days that he would go to the office had walls of file cabinets in there. And Sam told him, said, everything in those file cabinets are yours to look at. Read them, digest it, put it back where it goes. And when you're in this office, what's discussed in this office stays in this office. Now, here's a young man sitting there with the president of the National Wrestling Alliance, Sam Muchnick, and in would walk somebody like a Bill Longston or Whipper Billy Watson or the late great Lou Thez or Big Thunder Gene Kiniski or Fritz von Erich. You see what I'm talking about? Larry Matysik, young man following his dream. People that he watched, people that he researched, people that he just enjoyed being around. And they all taught him a lot about the business. And he took great notes. He wrote articles for wrestling magazines under an assumed name. He had to be careful about doing that because you got to remember Sam had him doing a lot of work. He would call in the results after the big cards at the Kiel Auditorium or at the St. Louis Arena. He'd call them into the Post-Dispatch or the Globe, call them into the radio stations, and he had to be careful when he was writing certain articles for the wrestling magazines. He didn't want to show any favoritism towards the man who he was wrestling and working for, Sam Muchnick. So he came up with an assumed name and wrote many articles. But then he would write the promos and the press releases for upcoming matches. Sam taught him how to do that, taught him how to write in a way that just reading those mailouts that people subscribe to, it made you want to be at that card that next Friday night. It made you want to be at ringside. When he wrote about Gene Kiniski taking on Fritz von Erich and how Kiniski was going to have to be careful of the claw, it made you want to be there. And that's why they would sell out Kiel Auditorium of 12,800 people a lot of times, or at the arena. As you've seen clips of the 1982 retirement party of Sam Muchnick, he admitted, yeah, there was nights he had crowds of 3,000-4,000 people, but there was many nights that he had sellout crowds, and he was proud of that. He gave St. Louis fans credit for being there for the wrestling business. And that's what Larry wanted. Larry wanted to continue that legacy that Sam Muchnick left. So at the early age of 24 years old, after he had done just about everything else in the office, as he used to joke about, he said he thinks that there was many days he'd grab the broom and sweep the place up. But from calling in results, from making phone calls, chasing down talent for Sam, when Sam would say, hey, I need you to get a hold of Kiniski, or I need you to get a hold of O'Connor and get him in here. Anything that Sam needed done pertaining to the wrestling business, Larry did it. So when he turned 24 years old, because Sam knew he could trust him and knew that he had an act for the business, they tapped him to be an announcer. And I remember Larry telling me he thought that's when his life really began. His dream was really, he was catching up with it. Started at 16 years old when he walked in that office, but now at 24 years old, he is going to be the man who is going to be sitting there calling the action of those matches of Pat O'Connor, Gene Kiniski, Johnny Valentine, Rip Hawk, the Funks, the Briscoes, you name it, all the greats. Remember, St. Louis was the wrestling hub. Don't care what anybody says. I've heard the greatest. I've read articles from people like Ric Flair that says you weren't anything in the wrestling business until you worked in St. Louis. I heard Jerry Briscoe. I interviewed Jack Briscoe here in St. Louis. He said the same thing. You didn't make it in the business until you got booked in St. Louis at Wrestling at the Chase under Sam Muchnick. So here's Larry Matysik at 24 years old, going to sit behind the microphone, and he is going to be calling the action. And the one thing Sam told him, because Larry was concerned that he was going to be able to live up to the standards that Sam wanted, and Sam told him, he said, I want you to make the fans feel like they want more. I want you to get them addicted to it. And by gosh, I can tell you, I know so many people that is addicted to the way Larry Matysik used to call those matches. I always said, you could have a vision impairment, blind, and on a Sunday morning, turn on Wrestling at the Chase, and you could be entertained by just the way Larry Matysik called a match. He made you feel like you were right there. He made you feel like you were inside the ring at times. And he did it by himself. Nowadays, they have 2, 3 announcers talking. They're talking over one another. They're trying to outdo one another. They're trying to put themselves over. Larry didn't need that. Sam told him, your job is to put the men in the ring over, and they'll do the rest. Your job is to get the fans into it and keep them happy and make them feel a part of it. And he did that. Sure, he had our late great friend Mickey Garagiola, somebody also we dearly miss. Larry and I talked about him all the time. But Mickey was the timekeeper, the ring announcer, rang the bell. Larry always joked and said that Mickey's main job is that when they were sitting at the announcer's table at ringside at Wrestling at the Chase, when the likes of Dick Bruiser and Ted DiBiase and them got outside the ring battling with Bruiser Brody or Dick Murdoch, his job was to grab that bell, the bell that Larry gave me, the bell that we rang at the SICW matches. It was his job to take that bell and head out on Lindell Boulevard because they didn't want nothing happening to that bell. So, but Larry didn't need anybody to bounce anything off of. If he threw a softball comment to Mickey, Mickey answered it, and Larry brought you right back. You were right there in the palm of his hands. And he did it so gracefully. I still hear people to this day talk about the enjoyment they got out of listening to Larry Matysik at Wrestling at the Chase. He enjoyed it. His fears went away. He told me, he said, after about the first month of TV tapings, he settled in. And then it was just like nature to him. It was just like he looked forward to doing it. You know, you couldn't have gave him $1 million back then for him to do anything else. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed meeting the fans. Fans would line up there on a Sunday morning waiting to get in for those Sunday afternoon tapings. People like Darla Skaggs, Juanita. People like that. People who adored Larry, people who to this day will remember Larry forever. Darla, good friend, lives in Minneapolis, and when she'd come back into town, when Larry, over the last 5-6 years, health was ailing, was failing, she would come in and she always had to go and see him. And I was so pleased that she was able to get in the week of his passing, because I knew he knew she was there, and I think it helped her to have some closure. But I can tell you, she will never ever forget her friend Larry Matysik. So Darla, I know you're watching this, and I know that there's only a few of us out there that really knew Larry. We knew what he stood for. He wasn't the rebel rouser. In fact, I used to kid him about being a hermit. As I said, he loved his sports. He loved college football, basketball, baseball. The man, growing up, his wife Pat said that there was a childhood friend that Larry grew up with, and he used to collect baseball cards, and nobody wanted to trade baseball cards with Larry because he knew everybody's history on the back of the cards and knew everything about everybody, and had a great collection of his own. And so the boys in the neighborhood never wanted to trade with Larry because they always knew he knew a little bit more about the players than he did. So it just had a great mind. Anytime I'd go to his house or I'd be talking to him on the phone, you could always hear a hockey game or a ball game on a television in the background. And no matter what I would call him for or he would call me, whether it be about the weather, we're going to end up talking about wrestling. There has not been one conversation in 51 years that I had with my friend Larry Matysik that did not end up talking about wrestling. Now, you can call us two old fogies or two nuts, but that's okay. We enjoyed it, and I'm going to continue to enjoy it. Maybe not as much with him not being here, but what you are witnessing on this video, as I said, the testimony of people that he touched, people that will never ever forget what he meant to them. I'm talking about guys who walked in and said, I want to be a wrestler. And Larry would look at him and say, who's trained you? Oh, well, I've jumped off a couple of garages onto mattresses and, I've done some backyard stuff. And, Larry and I would both laugh. But some of those young men have turned into pretty good wrestlers on the independent circuit. And you heard from some of them on this video. And then you heard from some of the guys like Ron Powers. You heard what he had to say. Heartfelt. Ron didn't have to get in the ring and say what he did, especially about me. I didn't expect that. But that come from Ron's heart because, as he said, Larry and I was there when there was time he was going to jump off the cliffs in this business. But I was the guy that was along for the ride with Larry Matysik. I'm the guy that he took underneath his wing, kind of like what Sam did to him. So it's kind of history repeating itself. Sam taught Larry. Larry was teaching Herb. I can only hope that he taught me everything. I think he did. In fact, I know he did. All the matches that Larry called on Wrestling at the Chase, all the results of those matches, and all the matches that were at Kiel Auditorium or at the Checker Dome, he gave me all of those on 3x5 index cards that they took. Sam was a record keeper. And Larry would sit and type those on an old typewriter, and I have them. If you want to know how many matches Dick DeBruiser had on Wrestling at the Chase, and if you want to know who he fought, if you want to know how long it took him to do the atomic drop or get disqualified, I've got those results. If you want to know how many matches Bruiser Brody had, who he took on, I have all those results from everybody who ever wrestled at the Chase or at the Kiel Auditorium or at the Checker Dome. He also gave me, a few years back, the programs that he wrote in hardbound books, mint condition. Not only did he give them to me, but he autographed them to my wife and I. And we will cherish them forever. So those are part of the history of St. Louis wrestling that I can say that my friend Larry Matysik gave to me. And he wanted me to have them because he knew the passion that I've had for the business, and he knew that they wouldn't go to waste. And that's kind of what we're doing with this video. This is a way that we're going to continue his legacy As I said, so many people you heard on this video tell you what Larry meant to them. Yes, some of them were short. Some of them, the guys got choked up because he meant so much to them. You had guys like Gary Jackson, who started in the business when he was 16 years old. Larry used to have to sneak him into wrestling at the Chase. And they did that because his mother worked at the restaurant with Jerry's with Mickey Garagiola, where he was a waiter. His mother, Gary's mother, was a worker there, and she knew Gary wanted to get into the wrestling matches, and so they would take him down there. But Gary turned in. He's about 58 years old now, I think, and he still wrestles and still in great shape. And he gives all the credit in the world to Larry Matysik and Mickey Garagiola. And to think here in 2018, going into 2019, he's working for SICW and still doing it and working for the MMWA over at the South Broadway Athletic Club. You heard my friend Tony Costa get in the ring and tell the stories of what Larry Matysik meant to him, being a little guy in the business. You had people like the Giant Assassin come back, who is probably the only person in the business that I know that when he retired, stayed retired. But on 2 different occasions now, Larry and I, this last time myself, called and said, I need a favor. I need you to come back and tell the fans at SICW at the East Grand Lake Community Center what Larry Matysik meant. You heard him. He showed up. People like that are far and few between in this business. And Larry helped mold these type of people. He had a way of reaching into people and pulling out the best of them. When guys like the Giant Assassin was in between, I want to go on the road, I want to make a living as a professional wrestler, I was there when Larry Matysik sat with him and explained the facts of the life of how tough it is. And he put him in touch with Bruiser Brody. And Bruiser Brody said, man, I could take you on the road and we could make a lot of money. You're a big guy. But it's a rough road out there. It's rough being on the road in this business. And to this day, I'm thankful. And Joe, the Giant Assassin, is thankful he made the decision to stay at home, be a family man, got a good job. But he's never forgot that. He always thanked Larry for that. He always thanked Brody for that. Ron Powers went on the road, traveled all over with Bruiser Brody, Japan, Puerto Rico, Hawaii. He lived what it was. But guess what? Came back and became a very successful man with a family. Still worked for SICW up until a couple of years ago when he retired. Still came and saw Larry when health was failing. Was there the week before Larry passed away. That's called friendship. True friendship. I've said all along in life, there are what you have is friends, and then you have true friends. And if you stop and think, all of you can probably count your real true friends. A lot of people will tell you they're your friends, but I'm talking about the true friends like Larry had, and the Ron Powers of the world, the Roger Baileys, the Big Daddies, the Tony Costas, people like that. There are people out there that you can call in a drop of a pen, and they're going to be there to help you. And that's what the relationship I had with Larry, even though you heard me say Larry was kind of a hermit. He didn't do a lot of socializing unless we went to Steak and Shake or we went to Bartolino's, a favorite place he liked to go in St. Louis. We used to take some of the boys there, Bruiser Brody, Dick Murdoch, Jerry Blackwell, Jack Briscoe, people like that. Terry Funk, I think, Stephen was there, Dory Funk. But he didn't go out socializing a lot. He was a homeboy. Him and his wife raised a beautiful daughter, Kelly. Kelly has been to more countries than I can even name. That was the other thing. He wanted his daughter to see the world. And through his and Pat, his wife's hard work, she succeeded doing that. Became a fine young lady. Still doing some traveling, still working hard. She, I know, misses her dad every day. I know his wife, Pat, has had the last 5-6 years has been extremely rough on Pat. Not only was she trying to take care of Larry, her mother, who is now 94 years old, she's having to take care of her. So, but she's strong, and she'll get through it. I promised Larry that she would. So, and I've tried to live up to all my promises. So, Larry is going to live on through me and through you fans who are watching this video. Because I got to believe if you're watching this video, it's because you were also one of those people that turned on that television on Saturday night, Sunday morning. And if you're old like me, remember when it started back on television. For a short time, it was on Channel 5 before it went to Channel 11, and it was on Wednesday nights before it went to Saturday night, Sundays. Now I'm really telling you how old I am. Larry and I tried to keep from doing that a lot of times. But so if you're watching this, you're probably one of those fans. And I'm hoping what you have witnessed on this video is that impact that Larry Matysik had on all of us. Not just me, each and every one of you. Each of you who watched those matches, heard him call the action, heard him drag you into that television set, whether it be the little bitty black, 12-inch black and white, or the full screen one. He made you feel a part of it. And that's what his job was. And he loved it. As you know, when Sam Muchnick retired in 1982, there was some of us we were just praying that Larry Matysik was going to be the person to take over. Well, this is wrestling. That didn't happen. Larry went a different way. Again, I was there with him. I was scared for him, but it was something he felt he had to do. He had people like Bruiser Brody that was helping him. He had people like Fritz von Erich on the outside giving him some advice. Boy, he was close. He was close to doing something that a lot of people said he couldn't do. But then we all know what happened around that 83, 84 mark. Outsiders decided to come in and kind of threw water on the fire. And Larry ended up going to work for the New York organization. I can tell you, did not like it. Many hours at night we talked about it, but it was paying the bills. And he had a chance to go to Atlanta to the WCW organization at one time. He wanted me to be a part of that. In fact, at one time he was making moving arrangements. I had to slow him down, put the brakes on. And we had a long discussion about that. And that got reversed, and which, boy, I'm glad. And then things, he stayed at home, and all along him and I were doing the independent shows. And like I said, he worked for the New York group for right about 10 years, but wasn't happy doing it. Wasn't the wrestling that he grew up with and learned the business. And they didn't want him showing them the way that was the right way as far as we were concerned. But it was a living for him. So the young man lived his dream. He lived it the best way he could, and I don't think he has got any regrets. If you think back on this video when he was honored with the Jim Melby Award. If you didn't listen to it thoroughly, go back and listen to it, because I think back then Larry knew that his life was on a downhill spiral. I think he was coming to realization that he wasn't going to get any better with his illness. And if you listen closely to that, it was kind of like he was writing his own obituary. He was telling us all that, don't have any regrets. He even is quoted in there when he had that conversation with Big Thunder Gene Kiniski before Gene passed away. Him and Gene were friends, but there in the last 6 months to a year of Gene's life, Larry was calling him on a weekly basis, and he would call me and say, hey, I just got off the phone with Thunder, and he sounds real good on the phone, but I just, there's just something in his voice that I don't know how much longer he's going to be here. And then sure enough, Gene passed away, and that affected Larry. But if you listen to the video, go back, Larry says in there that the only regret that Gene had was that he couldn't go back and do it all over again. And I got to believe, as I'm sitting here today, you heard Larry say it, he has that same regret. And he even says that to the audience that he was talking to, that all of us has probably got that same regret that's in this business, because it's been such a ride. It's such a rush. And Larry got to enjoy that. He has no regrets. I can tell you now, there was days that he'd have pain, and there was days he wouldn't. The days that he had that pain was terrible. Made several trips to the hospital that we were with him, his wife and I. My wife was there sometimes. But I can tell you, 7 days prior to his passing, him and I was sitting in his room discussing the upcoming SICW show. He had worked a year on that show. What is called old school booking in the business. We started a year ago, and he was so excited about that match, cage match in December. But 7 days prior to his passing, Ron Pyers came over and paid him a visit, and we were sitting there, and just like that, I started watching Sunday, Monday. About Tuesday, he really started taking a turn for the worst. We knew then that it was just a matter of time. But as I sat there with him, I remember him saying that. No regrets. No regrets. I also remember him telling me to think about the business, to think about what the future was going to hold for the boys in the locker room, the fans that we entertain every month at SICW. And those are the things that we'll be doing here as we move forward. Is it going to be the same with Larry Matysik not being in that locker room? Are the boys in the locker room going to be the same? The fans, they used to love to come up and talk to Larry. But there's one thing I know. He's not having those pain days anymore. He doesn't have to worry about me coming by and saying, hey, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do with that? So-and-so's canceled. Who do we get for this? Believe it or not, he really liked those times when I called and bothered him. And there were some times I did it just to keep him involved. The TV show, we've got just under 500 episodes in the can. We did that because I wanted to keep him active. Dr. Drew Ebenhouse, our young man who Larry just adored, stepped up to the plate. You heard from Drew on the video. Bright young man. Larry always said that, it's a shame that the territory days aren't here because he would find him a place as a play-by-play announcer in this business or full-time ring announcer. But it's people like that that Larry touched. So, in closing, if you're like me, you'll go back and watch this video many, many times because that's going to be a way to keep Larry's thoughts alive, his legacy alive, and I think it will keep you in tune to what life is all about. You get to see and hear from people that followed the career of a young boy. It's from 16 years old up until his passing of living his dream. He had it. He followed it every day. Not a day went by did Larry Matysik not think about wrestling. And that was his dream. So I want to thank each and every one of you that have taken time to purchase this video. The proceeds of this video will go towards keeping the ACE Academy training school that Larry was so supportive of and so wanted to do. It will help keep it going to help train young men who want to get into this business. So by you purchasing this DVD of Larry's legacy, you're helping that legacy of Larry Matysik continue. And again, from the bottom of my heart, his wife, Pat, his daughter, Kelly, and to his many, many wrestling workers, and to all of the fans throughout the St. Louis area and throughout the country, because with the internet nowadays, anybody can see wrestling from the St. Louis area. You know about Larry Matysik. I thank each and every one of you for being a part of this. And to my friend Larry, you're gone, but you will never be forgotten.